When the single dad opened the door that quiet morning, he never expected to see her, his ex-wife's sister, standing in the rain with tears in her eyes. Her trembling hands clutched an envelope that carried secrets buried for years. As their daughter's laughter echoed from inside, she whispered a sentence that stopped his heart cold, a truth that could either heal everything or destroy the last piece of peace he'd built. From that moment, the past came flooding back, every regret, every promise broken, and a revelation that would change all their lives forever. The kitchen smelled of burnt pancakes and vanilla extract, a combination that had become the signature scent of Saturday mornings in the Barrett household. Daniel stood at the stove, spatula in hand, trying to salvage what was supposed to be a special breakfast. The griddle hissed and smoked slightly as he flipped another misshapen pancake onto the chipped ceramic plate his mother had given them as a wedding gift, one of the few things Rebecca had left behind. Sunlight filtered through faded yellow curtains that came with the rental, curtains he'd never bothered to replace because choosing new ones felt like an admission that this was permanent, that this small rental was home now and not just temporary shelter. His 7-year-old daughter, Lily, hummed a tuneless melody from the living room, her voice bright, with the particular optimism only children possess before the world teaches them caution and disappointment. The sound made Daniel smile despite his culinary failures. 4 years of single parenting had taught him that confidence mattered more than actual skill, that a father's certainty could transform even the most questionable breakfast into something acceptable if he sold it right. "Dad, are these the lumpy kind or the good kind?" Lily called out, her small voice carrying the weight of past Saturday morning disappointments when enthusiasm hadn't been enough to mask his cooking failures. "The good kind, sweetheart," Daniel lied smoothly, arranging the pancakes with the burnt edges facing down, already reaching for the powdered sugar to cover his mistakes. "Come get them while they're hot." Their house wasn't much, a 2-bedroom rental on the outskirts of Portland, with creaky floors that announced every footstep and a bathroom door that wouldn't quite close all the way, requiring elaborate privacy negotiations. The living room carpet bore mysterious stains from previous tenants, and the kitchen faucet dripped no matter how many times Daniel tried to fix it, creating a percussion rhythm in the night that had become oddly comforting. But it was theirs in all the ways that mattered. Every crayon mark on the wall told a story, the purple scribble from when Lily was 4 and thought she could make it prettier, the height marks measured in pencil by the kitchen door frame, documenting her growth inch by stubborn inch, the mysterious green handprint at knee level that neither of them could remember creating, but both agreed must have been very important at the time. Daniel had built this piece carefully, brick by brick, through countless sleepless nights and overwhelming moments of doubt when he wasn't sure he could do this, when single parenting felt like drowning in slow motion. After everything fell apart, after Rebecca left without warning or explanation on that terrible Tuesday morning in March, walking out while Lily watched morning cartoons and Daniel got ready for work, thinking it was just another ordinary day. After the divorce papers arrived via courier 3 weeks later, while Lily was eating cereal, oblivious to how her world was about to shatter into pieces he'd spend years trying to reassemble. After the months of angry silence and unanswered questions that echoed through rooms that suddenly felt too empty, too quiet, too haunted by the ghost of the life they'd built, Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, her auburn hair pulled into a lopsided ponytail she'd insisted on doing herself this morning, declaring with fierce 7-year-old independence that she was too old for Dad's help with hair now. She looked so much like Rebecca, it sometimes made his chest ache with the physical weight of memory, the same green eyes that could shift from playful to serious in an instant, the same stubborn set to her jaw when she was concentrating on something important, the same way of tilting her head slightly to the left when considering a question. It was like looking at a ghost, a memory, a future that never happened, all wrapped up in the small body of his daughter. "Can we go to the park later?" Lily asked, climbing into her chair and immediately drowning her pancakes in syrup with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never heard of portion control or dental concerns, creating a small amber lake that threatened to overflow onto the table. "If the rain holds off." Daniel glanced toward the window where dark clouds gathered on the horizon like an approaching army, their edges tinged with the peculiar gray-green that veteran Portland residents recognized as the harbinger of serious weather. October in the Pacific Northwest meant unpredictable skies, moments of deceptive brightness, followed by sudden downpours that could soak you through in seconds. Lily nodded seriously, as if he'd imparted great wisdom about meteorology and life planning, and took an enormous bite of pancake that puffed out her cheeks like a chipmunk storing food. Daniel sipped his coffee bitter and too strong, the way he'd learned to drink it during those early months of solo parenting when sleep became a luxury he couldn't afford, and caffeine became the only thing between him and complete collapse. He watched his daughter over the rim of his mug, cataloging the small changes he noticed daily. How her legs seemed longer this week, how she'd lost another tooth, leaving a gap in her smile that made her look simultaneously older and younger. How her vocabulary expanded with words she picked up from school friends and books. This was enough, he told himself for the 1000th time, trying to make belief through repetition. This simple morning routine, her endless chatter about school and friends and the elaborate imaginary games she created in her head, the way she still sometimes crawled into his bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort in his presence and the solid reality of his heartbeat. This was the life he'd built from the ruins of his marriage. Constructed deliberately and carefully, like a house of cards, that he protected from any wind that might knock it down. He didn't allow himself to think about Rebecca often. 3 years had passed since she walked out of their lives with nothing but a suitcase and a coldness in her eyes he'd never seen before. A hardness that seemed to belong to a stranger wearing his wife's face. No explanation that made sense, no apology, no forwarding address, no phone number, no way to reach her even if he'd wanted to, which he told himself he didn't, that he'd moved past wanting anything from her except maybe answers that would never come. Just absence where presence had been. Silence where laughter used to echo through rooms that now felt too large and empty, despite being objectively small. The divorce had been quick and clean, processed through lawyers who spoke in careful, neutral tones, designed to drain emotion from what should have been emotionally devastating. Rebecca hadn't fought for custody, hadn't even requested visitation rights, hadn't asked for holidays or weekends or phone calls. She hadn't fought for anything, not the house they'd dreamed of buying, not the savings account they'd built together, not the shared friends or the life they'd constructed. She'd simply signed the papers with what the lawyer described as mechanical efficiency and disappeared like morning fog burned away by harsh sunlight, leaving Daniel to explain to a 4-year-old why Mommy wasn't coming home for dinner, why her clothes were gone from the closet, why the photos of their family now seemed to mock them from the walls. He'd told Lily that sometimes grown-ups made difficult choices, that love could change shape but never really disappeared. That Mommy had to go away, but it wasn't Lily's fault. None of it was her fault. Would never be her fault no matter what. He'd said whatever he could think of to ease the confusion and hurt in his daughter's eyes. Words that felt inadequate even as he spoke them. But the truth was, Daniel didn't understand it either. How do you explain abandonment to a child when you can't explain it to yourself? How do you make sense of a person you thought you knew, completely revealing themselves to be a stranger? Dad, you're doing the thinking face again. Lily's voice cut through his spiral of memory, pulling him back to the present. Daniel blinked, realizing he'd been staring at his coffee cup for too long, watching steam curl up and dissipate like the years of his marriage. Lily watched him with those perceptive green eyes that seemed too old for her face sometimes. Eyes that had learned to read his moods and monitor his emotional weather patterns the way he checked the sky for rain. Just planning our day, he said, forcing brightness into his voice like sunshine he didn't feel. Maybe we'll hit the library after the park. See if they have that book about the dragons you wanted, the one your friend Emma was talking about. Lily's face lit up with the pure, uncomplicated joy of a child whose immediate desire might be fulfilled. And the heavy moment passed like clouds clearing. She launched into an excited description of the Dragon Book series Emma had recommended, complete with dramatic hand gestures that sent droplets of syrup flying onto the table in sticky arcs. Daniel wiped up the mess with practiced patience, listening with the part of his attention not caught in the past, grateful for her easy joy, her resilience, her ability to bounce back from disappointments that would have crushed him. This was his reality now. The totality of his world shrunk down to these manageable pieces. Single father. part-time graphic designer working from home, taking whatever freelance projects he could find, while maintaining availability for school pickups and sick days and parent-teacher conferences. Full-time parent trying desperately to be enough for a little girl who deserved the world, who deserved two parents and a stable home, and answers to questions he couldn't provide. It wasn't the life he'd imagined at 25 when he'd married Rebecca in a small ceremony by the lake, surrounded by 30 people and promises of forever that turned out to be worth less than the paper they were written on. But it was good, he told himself. It was stable. It was safe. It was enough. It had to be enough. The past stayed in the past, locked away in boxes at the back of his closet and deeper boxes in his mind, sealed with tape and willpower. That's what his therapist had told him during those mandatory counseling sessions the court had recommended. Dr. Patterson, with her calm voice and sympathetic eyes, had said, "You can't change what happened. You can only control how you move forward." So he'd moved forward with determination and desperation, built routines that provided structure, created traditions that gave them something to count on when everything else felt chaotic and unstable. Outside, the rain that had been threatening all morning finally began with a soft patter against the windows that would likely turn into a downpour by afternoon. The park trip would have to wait for another day. Daniel started mentally planning alternatives, maybe a movie marathon with the blanket fort Lily had been requesting for weeks, or they could finally tackle that 1,000-piece puzzle of a castle they'd started last month, or perhaps an indoor treasure hunt with clues hidden throughout the house. He cleared the dishes while Lily ran to her room to find her art supplies, her footsteps thundering down the hallway with the particular heaviness of a child who hadn't yet learned to moderate her enthusiasm or consider downstairs neighbors. Saturday mornings had become their time for creative projects, a tradition that filled their home with glitter and paint stains and the satisfying chaos of creation. Last week they'd made papier-mâché masks that were still drying on newspaper in the spare room. The week before, they'd attempted origami with varying degrees of success. Lily had mastered the crane through pure determination, while Daniel's attempts looked like paper that had been in a fight and lost badly. Daniel was rinsing syrup off plates, watching it spiral down the drain in amber swirls that caught the light, when he heard it. A soft knock at the front door. Tentative, almost apologetic, as if the person knocking wasn't sure they should be there at all. As if they might run away if he didn't answer quickly enough. He frowned, pausing with wet hands over the sink. They weren't expecting anyone. The landlord didn't usually stop by on weekends, and Lily's friends always called first, their mothers coordinating playdates with the efficient precision of military operations. Drying his hands on a dish towel decorated with faded lemons, Daniel walked to the door, noting how the rain had intensified in just the last few minutes, drumming harder against the roof, in a rhythm that sounded almost urgent, almost like warning. When Daniel opened the door, the world tilted on its axis, everything familiar suddenly strange and impossible. She stood on his doorstep like a ghost made solid, like memory given form and breath and wet clothes. Claire Mitchell, Rebecca's younger sister, a person he hadn't seen in over 4 years, hadn't thought about in at least 2. Someone who belonged to a chapter of his life he'd worked hard to close. Rain soaked through her thin navy jacket, plastering her dark hair against her pale face in wet strands that looked almost black against her skin. Her eyes the same almond shape as Rebecca's, but a different shade, more gray than green, like storm clouds instead of spring grass were rimmed red and swollen. Whether from crying or the cold wind or both, Daniel couldn't tell and didn't want to guess. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain filled the silence between them, a white noise backdrop to the shock of recognition and the sudden flood of memories Daniel had been avoiding. Somewhere behind him in the house, Lily's voice drifted through the hallway, singing off-key to a song from her favorite movie, blissfully unaware that a ghost from the past stood on their doorstep, bringing who knew what kind of trouble. Daniel. Claire's voice came out rough, barely above a whisper, cracking on the syllables of his name like something broken trying to hold together with tape and hope. "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have come unannounced like this. I know this is unexpected and uncomfortable, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Daniel's hand tightened on the doorframe, knuckles whitening as he gripped the painted wood like an anchor to reality. He'd received exactly one communication from Claire after the divorce, a text that arrived at 2 in the morning, an apology for her sister's behavior wrapped in awkward words, an offer to help with Lily if he ever needed it, stilted phrases trying to bridge an unbridgeable gap. He'd never responded, had deleted the message, and tried to delete the entire Mitchell family from his life with the same finality. "What are you doing here?" The question came out harder than he intended. Sharp edges of old wounds cutting through any pretense of politeness. Looking at Claire meant thinking about Rebecca, and thinking about Rebecca meant touching wounds he'd worked so hard to heal over, scar tissue that was still tender beneath the surface, still capable of bleeding if pressed too hard. Claire flinched as if his words had physical weight, as if he'd slapped her instead of just spoken. She swallowed hard before speaking again, and he watched her throat work with the effort. She clutched something against her chest. An envelope. He realized with growing unease, off-white, and slightly crumpled from being held too tightly for too long. The paper softened by rain and desperate fingers. "I need to talk to you, please, just for a few minutes." Her voice gained strength, even as her body trembled from cold, or emotion, or both. "It's important. It's about Rebecca. There are things you need to know." "Claire." I don't think Daniel started, his automatic defense mechanisms engaging, walls going up to protect the fragile peace he'd built brick by careful brick. "It's about Rebecca," she interrupted with sudden intensity. And there was something in her tone that stopped him cold. Something that suggested this wasn't a social call, or an attempt at reconciliation. "Daniel, there are things you need to know, things I should have told you years ago but couldn't, things that change everything you thought you knew." A gust of wind sent rain spraying across the porch in a cold mist, and Claire shivered violently, her thin jacket offering no protection against October's bite. Despite everything, despite the anger simmering just below his surface, despite the confusion and the instinctive desire to shut the door and protect the life he'd built from any intrusion of the past, Daniel found himself stepping aside. His Midwestern upbringing and basic human decency overrode his desire to keep the past locked out where it belonged. 5 minutes, he said quietly but firmly. Setting a boundary, even as he violated his own desire to keep her away. "Lily's here. I don't want her upset. She's been through enough already, without dredging up her mother and opening old wounds." Claire nodded quickly, gratitude and relief flooding her features as she stepped inside, leaving wet footprints on the hardwood floor like tracks of tears, like evidence of intrusion. She was thinner than he remembered from family gatherings years ago, with pronounced shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and burdens carried too long alone. She'd always been the gentler sister, softer spoken, easier to overlook in Rebecca's bright, commanding presence. Where Rebecca had been all sharp edges and vibrant energy that filled a room, Claire had been quiet corners and subtle grace that people noticed only if they paid attention. Daniel closed the door against the rain and the cold and whatever else she'd brought with her, closing them into the warmth of his small house, where the ghost of Rebecca's sister stood dripping and trembling. He led her into the kitchen, deliberately away from where Lily played in her room, sounds of building blocks clicking together drifting down the hallway. Claire left a trail of wet footprints on the floor, still clutching that envelope like a lifeline or a weapon. Daniel couldn't tell which, and wasn't sure he wanted to know. "Do you want coffee, tea, something to warm you up?" The offer came automatically. Years of politeness and social conditioning overriding his discomfort, the rituals of hospitality his mother had drilled into him, emerging even now when he wanted nothing more than to demand she leave. "No, thank you. I don't need anything." Claire set the envelope on the table with careful, precise movements, as if it might explode or disappear if she wasn't gentle, but kept one hand on it protectively. I need to say this before I lose my courage, before I talk myself out of it again like I have a dozen times already." Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed defensively across his chest, creating physical distance between them even in the small space of his kitchen. Part of him wanted to demand she leave immediately, to shove her back out into the rain and slam the door on this intrusion of his carefully maintained peace. Another part, the part that had spent 3 years with unanswered questions eating at him like acid, the part that woke up at 3 a.m., sometimes wondering what he'd done wrong. Whether he could have prevented it, whether he'd somehow driven her away, that part needed to hear whatever she'd come to say. "You said this is about Rebecca." He made it a statement rather than a question, his voice carefully neutral, giving nothing away of the turmoil beneath. "Yes." Claire's fingers trembled against the envelope, and he watched her take a deep breath, visibly steeling herself for whatever came next. "When's the last time you heard from her? When's the last time Rebecca contacted you in any way?" The question caught him off guard with its simplicity and its strangeness. "The divorce papers. 3 years ago. Her lawyer sent them with a courier." "Why? Has she been trying to contact me? Because I swear, Claire, if she sent you here to test the waters or ask for something." "Daniel." Claire closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, tears had gathered but didn't fall, pooling at the bottom of her lashes like small reservoirs of grief waiting to overflow. "Daniel, Rebecca died 6 months ago." The words landed like physical blows, like punches to his solar plexus that drove the air from his lungs and the strength from his knees. Daniel felt himself sway, the room tilting at an angle that made no sense, his grip on the counter tightening until his knuckles went bone white. The kitchen seemed to lose its right angles. Everything suddenly wrong and distorted, like looking through water or tears or the warped glass of impossible grief. "What?" The word came out barely above a whisper, all the air gone from his lungs. "She had cancer. Pancreatic. Aggressive. Fast-moving." Claire's voice broke on the medical terms, words she'd probably said too many times to too many people. By the time they found it, it had already spread to her liver, her lungs. They gave her a year, if she was lucky. She got 8 months. 8 months from diagnosis to... Her voice trailed off into silence more eloquent than words. Daniel couldn't process it, couldn't make the words fit into any framework that made sense with the world he knew. Rebecca, dead. The woman he'd loved with everything in him when they were young, then hated with equal intensity after she left, then tried so desperately hard to stop thinking about it all. Gone. Permanently, irrevocably, impossibly gone. Dead. The word felt too small for the enormity it contained. Too simple for the complexity of what it meant. Too final for something that couldn't possibly be true. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" His voice rose with anger and grief tangling together into something painful and sharp. "Why didn't you?" He cut himself off, remembering Lily in the next room, lowering his voice to a harsh whisper that felt like screaming. "Claire, what the hell is going on? 6 months? She's been dead for 6 months, and I'm only finding out now. I had a right to know. Lily had a right to say goodbye to her mother. How could you? How could she? She made me promise." Claire was crying now, tears streaming down her face, in tracks that followed the rainwater still dripping from her hair. Mixing salt water with sky water. "She made me swear on everything we'd ever been to each other that I wouldn't contact you until... Not until I absolutely had to. Not until enough time had passed. Not until she was gone long enough that maybe it wouldn't hurt as much. She was trying to protect you, Daniel. Both of you. Had to?" Daniel's voice came out strangled, his throat tight with emotions he couldn't name and didn't want to feel. "Claire, what the hell does that mean? Had to? I had a right to know. Lily had a right to see her mother one last time, to say goodbye, to have some kind of closure, instead of just living with this abandonment. How dare you? How dare she keep this from us?" From down the hall, Lily's cheerful voice called out, cutting through the tension like a knife through butter. "Dad? Who's here? Is someone visiting? Can I come see?" Both adults froze. the moment crystallizing into something sharp and dangerous that could cut them all if handled wrong. Claire quickly wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing tears and rain across her pale cheeks in streaks. Daniel forced his expression into something approaching normal. Though his heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape, though his hands shook and his vision blurred at the edges with shock and grief and anger he couldn't process. "Just a friend, sweetheart," he managed to call back. His voice only slightly strained, only slightly wrong. "An old friend from way back. Keep playing. I'll be there soon. Just a few more minutes of grown-up talk, okay?" "Okay. But hurry, because I'm building something really cool, and I want to show you." Lily's response came back cheerful and unconcerned. And Daniel heard her return to her blocks, the sound of building and creation continuing while his world fell apart in the kitchen, while everything he thought he knew rearranged itself into impossible new configurations. He turned back to Claire with deliberate slowness, fighting for control. She had stood from her chair, pushing the envelope across the table toward him with shaking fingers, sliding it across the worn wood like an offering or an accusation, or maybe both. "She wrote you a letter. Before she died. Weeks before the end. When she could still hold a pen steady enough to write." Claire's breath hitched, and she wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hold her own breaking pieces together. "She made me promise to deliver it myself, to explain everything in person, instead of just leaving you to figure it out from words on paper. Daniel, the divorce wasn't what you thought it was. Nothing was what you thought. Everything you believed about why she left, about who she was, about what happened, it was all based on lies. Lies she thought she had to tell to protect you." Daniel stared at the envelope as if it were a snake coiled to strike, as if it contained poison or explosives or truth he wasn't ready for. His name was written across the front in handwriting he'd recognize anywhere, would recognize blind, would recognize in his dreams or nightmares Rebecca's careful script. Each letter precisely formed the way she'd been taught in those childhood calligraphy classes she'd taken so seriously, the way she'd practiced for hours to get perfect. The sight of it, so familiar and so impossible, so ordinary and so devastating, made something crack in his chest, made something that had been frozen begin to thaw painfully. "I can't read this right now." He picked up the envelope with trembling hands, felt the weight of multiple pages inside, heavy with words and secrets and truth he'd been denied for years, then set it back down as if it burned him, pushing it away like it might contaminate him with its contents. "Not with Lily here. Not when I can barely breathe. Not. I understand." Claire wrapped her arms tighter around herself, protective and defeated. "But you need to read it soon. You need to know the truth about why she left. About everything that happened to her. About what was done to her that made her feel like she had no choice. Why now?" The question came out bitter, anger finally breaking through the shock like lava through earth. Hot and acidic and destructive. "Why wait 3 years? Why let me believe she just stopped caring? That she just walked away because our life together wasn't good enough? Why let Lily grow up thinking her mother abandoned her, that she wasn't loved enough to make her mother stay? Why, Claire? Why put us through that, if there was some other explanation? Because I'm a coward." Claire's voice dropped to barely audible, confession and condemnation wrapped together in words that sounded like they cost her everything to say. "Because I was protecting myself as much as her. Because she begged me, Daniel. She was dying, wasting away. And she begged me to wait. To give you both time to heal first. To let enough distance pass that maybe the truth wouldn't hurt as much as it would have if you'd known from the beginning. And maybe because I couldn't face you, couldn't face what she'd done and what I'd helped her do by staying silent. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for all of it." The sound of Lily's footsteps approaching down the hall, her humming preceding her like a herald, made them both tense. Claire moved toward the door with sudden urgency, grabbing her jacket that she'd never removed, pulling it tighter around herself like armor. "I should go. You need time. You need to process all of this. And I can't. I can't be here when you do. She scribbled something on a scrap of paper from her pocket. With shaking hands. This is my number. Call me when you've read the letter. Or don't call. That's okay too. But Daniel read it. Please. For Lily's sake, if not your own. She deserves to know the truth about her mother. To know it wasn't what she thinks. She was out the door and into the rain before he could respond, moving with the desperate speed of someone fleeing a crime scene, or their own conscience, or maybe both. Daniel stood holding the envelope and the paper with her number, watching through the window as she got into an old sedan and drove away too fast for the wet roads, leaving him with questions that multiplied like rabbits, and a letter from a dead woman that promised to upend everything he thought he knew about his own life. Daniel stood alone in his kitchen for a long time after Claire left, the sound of the door closing still echoing through the house like a gunshot, or a death knell, or the final punctuation on a conversation he wasn't ready to have. The envelope lay on the table where she'd left it. Looking innocuous and ordinary, just paper and ink. Nothing that should carry the weight of 3 years of grief and confusion and carefully constructed peace. His name stared up at him in Rebecca's familiar handwriting, each letter carefully formed in her distinctive way. The capital D had its slight flourish she'd developed in those calligraphy classes. The way she crossed her T's with precise horizontal lines, ordinary marks on ordinary paper that suddenly felt like they contained universes, like they held answers to questions he'd stopped asking because the silence had been too painful. He couldn't touch it yet. His hands felt numb, disconnected from his body, like they belonged to someone else. The rain continued its steady percussion against the windows. And somewhere in the house, Lily was building something with her blocks, the soft clatter of wood on wood providing a strange counterpoint to the chaos in his mind. His heartbeat felt too loud in his ears, his breathing too shallow, everything in his body operating at the wrong frequency. Rebecca was dead. The words kept circling in his mind but wouldn't land, wouldn't settle into understanding. Dead. Gone. Permanently absent from a world that had continued spinning without her for 6 months while he'd known nothing. Felt nothing, received no cosmic signal that someone who'd once been half his world had ceased to exist. She'd been dying while he was making pancakes and helping Lily with homework and living his ordinary life in ignorance. She'd been gone for half a year while he'd been. What? Moving on? Healing? Or just existing in the carefully controlled numbness he'd learned to mistake for peace? Daniel moved mechanically through the kitchen, needing something to do with his hands, some task to anchor him while his thoughts spiraled. He put away the breakfast dishes that were still sitting on the counter, wiped down surfaces that were already clean, reorganized the spice rack that didn't need reorganizing. His hands needed work, needed purpose, needed something to do besides shake. Dad? Lily appeared in the doorway, her arms full of blocks, her face bright with the excitement of creation. Come see what I made. It's a castle with a tower and everything. Daniel forced himself to smile, to focus on his daughter, instead of the bomb that had just been dropped on his life. This was the skill he'd developed over 3 years of single-parenting compartmentalization, the ability to set aside his own emotional chaos to be present for his daughter. To protect her from adult problems she shouldn't have to carry. Show me, he said, following her to the living room, where an elaborate structure of blocks rose from the floor, precarious and proud. Lily knelt beside her creation, launching into an animated explanation of the castle's features, the princess who lived there, the dragon that guarded it. Daniel sat cross-legged on the floor beside her, nodding and asking questions, performing the role of engaged father, while part of his mind remained in the kitchen with that envelope, with the impossible revelation that Rebecca was gone, with the promise of truth that might explain everything, or might just make it all worse. They spent an hour building together, expanding the castle, creating stories. Lily's imagination ran wild with tales of brave knights and clever princesses, and Daniel let himself get swept up in it, grateful for the escape into a child's simpler world where problems could be solved with courage and determination. where happy endings were guaranteed if you were just good enough, brave enough, true enough. But eventually Lily grew restless, ready for something new. "Can I watch a movie?" she asked, already reaching for the remote. "Sure, kiddo. Pick something good." Daniel stood, his knees protesting from sitting on the floor. "I need to do some work in the kitchen. Boring adult stuff. You okay out here on your own for a bit?" "Yeah." Lily was already scrolling through options, her attention fully captured by the possibilities on the screen. Daniel returned to the kitchen, to the envelope that seemed to pulse with significance like a living thing. He made himself a fresh cup of coffee, took it to the table, sat down, stared at his name in Rebecca's handwriting, tried to prepare himself for whatever he was about to learn, knowing there was no way to truly prepare, that some truths arrived whether you were ready or not. His hands shook as he finally picked up the envelope, as he slid his finger under the flap and tore it open. 3 pages, folded neatly, covered in Rebecca's familiar script. The paper was good quality, heavy, like she'd chosen it carefully for this final communication, like she'd known these words needed to last, needed to carry weight. Daniel took a deep breath and began to read. "Daniel, if you're reading this, Claire kept her promise. Part of me wasn't sure she would. I asked so much of her. Too much, probably. But if you're holding this letter, then you know now. I'm gone. And I need to try to explain why I left in the first place, even though I know words on paper can't undo 3 years of hurt and confusion. But I have to try. I don't know where to start, so I'll start with the most important part. The part I need you to believe, even if you don't believe anything else. I never stopped loving you, not for one single day, not when I left, not during the divorce, not in all the years since. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. And walking away from you and Lily was like cutting out my own heart. I've been bleeding internally ever since." Daniel had to stop, press his palm against his eyes. The words blurred together, pain and grief and anger mixing into something unnameable. By the time you read this, Claire will have told you about Gregory Holden, about the harassment, the lies, the threats. I won't repeat all of that here. The facts are the facts, and they're ugly enough without me dwelling on them. What I need you to understand is why I didn't tell you at the time, why I didn't trust you with the truth. I was broken, Daniel, completely shattered, when everything started happening with Gregory, when the rumors started spreading, when his wife hired that investigator. I fell apart in ways I couldn't show you. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating, started having panic attacks in the bathroom at work. I felt like I was drowning and couldn't figure out which way was up. And I was terrified. Terrified of the scandal touching you and Lily. Terrified of your career being affected by association with me. Terrified that you wouldn't believe me, that you'd think I'd actually had an affair, that I'd somehow brought this on myself. I know now that fear was irrational, that you would have believed me and stood by me. But when you're drowning, rational thought is the first casualty. Gregory offered me a deal. If I disappeared quietly, quit my job, left town, stayed silent about what he'd done, he would make sure his wife dropped the investigation. He would make sure the fake evidence never went public. He would protect my reputation by letting me vanish instead of destroying me publicly. I took the deal, Daniel. I took it because I convinced myself I was protecting our family, that if I just removed myself from the equation, you and Lily could continue your lives untouched by the scandal I'd brought into them. I told myself I was being noble, making a sacrifice for the people I loved. The truth is uglier and simpler. I was a coward. I ran instead of fighting. I let fear make my decisions. I chose the easier path of disappearing over the harder path of standing my ground and trusting you to stand with me. I signed the divorce papers because I thought it was the final piece of protection cutting all legal ties so that nothing that happened to me could touch you. I gave up custody because I thought Lily would be better off with a father who was stable and present rather than a mother who was broken and spiraling. Every day since has been a lesson in regret, every single day. But by the time I realized how wrong I'd been, How catastrophically I'd misjudged everything. Too much time had passed. How could I come back after months of silence? How could I explain that I'd thrown away our family based on threats from a predator and my own cowardice? How could I ask for forgiveness for something unforgivable? So I stayed away. I built a quiet life in another city under a different name. I worked in retail, then at a small nonprofit. Nothing like my old career, but it was peaceful, safe, empty. I kept tabs on you through Claire. Not often I was afraid even that connection might somehow lead Gregory back to you. But every few months, a phone call, an email, Claire would look at your social media, take screenshots, pass them along to me. I watched Lily grow up in fragments, in pixels, in secondhand stories, her first day of kindergarten, her gap-toothed smile when she lost her first tooth, the birthday parties and Halloween costumes and ordinary moments that make up a childhood. Each photo was a gift and a knife, proof that she was thriving without me, that you were being the father I'd never been able to be as a mother. About a year ago, I started feeling sick. I ignored it for months, stomach pain, weight loss, fatigue. Told myself it was stress or bad diet or getting older. By the time I finally saw a doctor, the cancer had spread everywhere. Pancreatic adenocarcinoma, stage 4. They gave me a year if I was very lucky. I got 8 months. I thought about contacting you when I got the diagnosis, asking to see Lily one last time. But what right did I have? I'd chosen to leave. I'd been absent by choice, not circumstance. Why should I get a deathbed redemption? Why should I put that burden on either of you, the obligation to forgive a dying woman, to give comfort you didn't owe me? So, I'm doing this instead, leaving you this letter, asking Claire to give you the truth I should have given you 4 years ago, hoping you'll be able to explain to Lily someday, when she's old enough to understand, that her mother loved her desperately, that leaving wasn't about her, that it was never, ever about her. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know the truth. I need Lily to know, eventually, that she was wanted, that she was loved, that every day I was gone was a day I missed her, thought about her, regretted my choice. Thank you for being the father she needed. Thank you for building a life for her that I couldn't give her. Thank you for loving her enough for both of us. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for all of it. For the lies. For the leaving. For the years you spent not knowing. For the pain I caused you both. For everything I stole from us through my cowardice. Always, Rebecca. Daniel read the letter 3 times, then a 4th, as if repetition might change the words or soften their impact or somehow make them make sense. The rain outside had intensified, drumming against the roof with force. In the living room, Lily's movie played on, cheerful music leaking through the walls. The contrast between the ordinary sounds of his house and the devastation in his hands felt surreal. Rebecca had been harassed, had been framed, had been threatened into leaving by a predator who'd destroyed her career, her reputation, her sense of safety. She hadn't left because she stopped loving him. She'd left because she'd been terrified and broken and convinced herself she was protecting them. The knowledge felt both relieving and crushing. All those nights of wondering what he'd done wrong, how he'd failed as a husband, whether he'd somehow driven her away they'd been based on false premises. But the truth was almost harder to bear than the mystery had been. She'd suffered, and he hadn't known. She'd needed him, and he hadn't been there because she hadn't let him be there. And now she was gone, and there was no chance for do-overs, or better choices, or the conversation they should have had 4 years ago. Daniel's phone sat on the table beside the letter. He picked it up, pulled up the paper with Claire's number, stared at it. He should call her, should demand more details, more context, more something. But his throat was too tight for words, his mind too scrambled to form coherent questions. Instead, he looked up Gregory Holden, The search returned immediately. Gregory Holden, Senior Vice President at Cascade Marketing Solutions. Professional headshot showed a handsome man in his late 40s, with styled gray hair and a confident smile. The kind of smile that probably charmed clients and made people trust him, that hid whatever darkness lived behind his eyes. Daniel scrolled through the results. Gregory's company profile listed his achievements, his awards, his rise through the ranks. Married to Diane Holden for 23 years, 2 children in college, active in community organizations, on the board of a local children's charity. The hypocrisy was staggering. This predator, this man who'd wielded his power to destroy Rebecca's life, was publicly celebrated as a success story. A family man, a community leader. He'd faced no consequences, suffered no setbacks, continued his life unmarred while Rebecca had died alone, and Rebecca's daughter had grown up without a mother. "Dad?" Lily's voice from the doorway made him jump. "The movie's over. Can we make lunch?" Daniel quickly closed the browser, shoved the letter back into its envelope, tried to school his expression into something approaching normal. But Lily was perceptive, had been reading his moods for years. "You look sad," she observed, tilting her head in that way she had. "Are you thinking about the lady who came? About Mom?" There was no point in lying. Lily deserved better than that, deserved more credit than he usually gave her. "Yeah, sweetheart. I'm thinking about Mom. Claire told me some things today that made me sad. But it's okay to be sad sometimes. Sadness is just love that has nowhere to go." Lily considered this, her 7-year-old brain processing concepts that should be too complex for her age. Did something happen to Mom? Daniel knelt down to her level, taking her small hands in his larger ones. "Mom died, Lily, a few months ago. She was sick, and Claire came to tell us." He watched his daughter's face crumple, watched tears well up and spill over, watched her process grief in real time. She threw herself at him, and he caught her, held her while she cried into his shoulder, her small body shaking with sobs. "I don't even remember her much," Lily choked out between cries. "And now I can't ever know her. It's not fair." "No, baby, it's not fair at all." Daniel held her tighter, his own tears falling into her hair. "But we can talk about her. I have stories. Claire has stories. We can make sure you know who she was, even if she can't be here to tell you herself." They sat on the kitchen floor, holding each other, crying for a woman one had loved and one barely remembered, crying for everything that had been lost and couldn't be recovered. Outside, the rain continued its relentless fall, washing the world clean or maybe just washing it away. Eventually, Lily's tears slowed. She pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Can we have grilled cheese for lunch?" "That's comfort food, right?" "Yeah, kiddo, that's definitely comfort food." Daniel stood, helping her up, grateful for her resilience, for the way children could move through grief and come out the other side still hungry, still present, still able to ask for what they needed. While he made sandwiches and Lily sat at the table drawing pictures, Daniel's mind worked through what he'd learned. Rebecca was dead, but her story wasn't over. Gregory Holden was still out there, still in power, potentially still hurting other women. Claire had mentioned documentation emails, fake evidence with timestamps, proof of what had been done. Maybe there was something he could do. Maybe he owed it to Rebecca's memory, to the other potential victims, to his daughter who deserved to know her mother's suffering hadn't been meaningless. Maybe it was time to stop hiding from the past and do something about it. But first, grilled cheese. First, taking care of his daughter. First, getting through the immediate grief of learning someone you'd loved and lost was now lost in a completely different, utterly final way. The rest could wait. For now, there was just this. Making lunch, comforting his child, breathing through the pain that came in waves so intense he wasn't sure he could survive them. And yet somehow, impossibly, it did. The afternoon stretched into evening, and Daniel found himself unable to stop thinking about the letter, about Gregory Holden, about the injustice of a predator thriving while his victim was dead and buried. After Lily went to bed, he pulled out his laptop and started digging deeper. He found Gregory's social media profiles, public-facing and carefully curated. Photos of family vacations, company events, charity galas, comments from colleagues praising his leadership, his mentorship of younger employees. The word mentorship made Daniel's stomach turn, knowing what that mentorship might actually mean for young women under Gregory's power. He searched for any hint of scandal, any whisper of impropriety, found nothing. Gregory's public image was spotless, polished to a shine that reflected back only what he wanted people to see. But Daniel knew now what lay beneath that shine, knew there was rot under the polish, predation hiding behind professionalism. His phone buzzed, Claire's name on the screen. "Hello? Did you read it?" Her voice was quiet, hesitant. "Yeah." Daniel's voice came out rough. "Yeah. I read it. I'm sorry. I know it's a lot to process." "I know. Tell me about Gregory Holden." Daniel cut her off. "Tell me everything Rebecca told you. Every detail she shared about what he did to her." There was a pause on the line. Then, "Are you sure?" "It's ugly, Daniel. Really ugly. I need to know. All of it." So Claire told him about how it started with comments that could be dismissed as jokes, compliments that felt slightly too personal but were delivered in front of others, so Rebecca questioned whether she was being oversensitive, about how it escalated to touch his hand on the small of her back, shoulder squeeze that lasted too long, accidental brushes that didn't feel accidental, about how Rebecca tried to handle it professionally, tried to set boundaries, tried to document and report through proper channels, about how Gregory was protected by his position, his track record, his value to the company, about how HR suggested Rebecca might be misinterpreting friendly gestures, might be too sensitive, might want to consider whether pursuing this was really in her best interest professionally, about how Gregory, realizing Rebecca wouldn't stay silent, had created false evidence of an affair, doctored emails and text messages, photos taken out of context, records manufactured to show a relationship that never existed, about how his wife's private investigator had built a case file full of lies that looked like truth if you didn't know what to look for, about how Gregory had cornered Rebecca in the parking garage late one night and laid out his terms: disappear quietly, or he'd release everything publicly. He'd ruin her reputation so thoroughly, she'd never work in marketing again. He'd make sure everyone they knew believed she was a homewrecker who'd pursued a married man. He'd destroy her completely, and there would be nothing she could do to fight it because he had money and power and a sterling reputation, while she had nothing but her word against his manufactured evidence. She was terrified, Claire said, her voice thick with tears. She came to me that night barely able to breathe, having a full panic attack. She showed me the fake evidence, and it looked real, Daniel. Even I had a moment of doubt before she explained. And if I doubted her, who would believe her against someone like him? So she ran, and she made me promise not to tell anyone why. Made me swear I'd protect you and Lily from any fallout, from any chance that Gregory might come after her family if he thought they knew too much. Does he know she's dead? I don't think so. Rebecca lived under a different name. He had no way to track her once she left. Claire paused. But Daniel, what are you thinking? Because I know that tone, and it sounds like you're planning something. I'm thinking that bastard has been getting away with this for years. That Rebecca probably wasn't his first victim, and definitely isn't his last. That someone needs to stop him before he destroys any more lives. Rebecca made me promise. Rebecca's dead. The words came out harsher than Daniel intended. He softened his tone. She can't be hurt anymore, but there are other women at his company right now. Other potential victims who don't know they're in danger. We have documentation, right? The fake evidence with timestamps? Rebecca's journal entries about what happened. Yes, I have all of it. Then we use it. We go to his company. We go to the press if we have to. We make sure everyone knows what kind of man Gregory Holden really is. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Are you sure? This will be public. People will talk about Rebecca, about your marriage, about Lily. Are you prepared for that? Daniel thought about his daughter sleeping peacefully down the hall. About the kind of world he wanted her to grow up in. About whether silence ever really protected anyone. Or just let predators keep hunting. Yeah. I'm sure. For Rebecca. For Lily. For all the women he might hurt, if no one stops him. He paused. Will you help me? Yes. No hesitation. Yes. I'll help. I should have done this years ago. Maybe if I had, Rebecca would still be alive. Don't do that to yourself. You can't change the past. We can only control what we do now. They talked for another hour, making plans, discussing strategy. Claire would compile all the documentation Rebecca had left. Daniel would reach out to Cascade Marketing Solutions' HR department first thing Monday morning. They'd give the company a chance to handle it internally. But if they tried to bury it, they'd go public. After hanging up, Daniel stood in Lily's doorway watching her sleep, her face peaceful in the glow of her nightlight. He thought about the future he was choosing, the scrutiny, the questions, the exposure of private pain. But he also thought about the alternative, staying silent while Gregory Holden mentored more young women, wielded his power over more vulnerable employees, destroyed more lives because no one had the courage to stop him. Rebecca had stayed silent out of fear and died with regrets. Daniel wouldn't make the same mistake. He walked to his home office, pulled out a notebook, and started writing down everything he knew, everything he needed to do, every question that needed answers. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever was. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Through the window, Daniel could see stars beginning to emerge from behind the clouds. Tiny points of light pushing back against the darkness. It felt like a sign, or maybe it was just weather. Either way, he chose to take it as hope. Tomorrow, he'd start the fight Rebecca never got to finish. Tonight, he'd honor her memory by refusing to be paralyzed by grief, by choosing action over helplessness, by believing that maybe, just maybe, truth could still matter more than power. Rebecca was gone. But her story wasn't over yet. The afternoon stretched into evening, measured in the slow drip of rain and the even slower processing of impossible truths. Daniel found himself unable to stop thinking about the letter, about Gregory Holden's face on the company website, about the fundamental injustice of a predator thriving while his victim was dead and buried in a grave Daniel hadn't even known existed until hours ago. After Lily went to bed earlier than usual, exhausted by the emotional weight of learning her mother had died, Daniel pulled out his laptop and started digging deeper into Gregory Holden's public presence. He found carefully curated social media profiles, posts about family vacations to Europe, company events where Gregory stood center stage accepting awards, charity galas where he posed with his wife and smiled for cameras, comments from colleagues praising his leadership, his mentorship of younger employees, his dedication to fostering talent. The word mentorship made Daniel's stomach turn, knowing what that mentorship might actually mean for young women under Gregory's power. His phone buzzed around 10 p.m., Claire's name on the screen. Did you read it? Her voice was quiet, hesitant, afraid of the answer. Yeah, I read it. Daniel's voice came out rough, scraped raw by too much emotion. Claire, I need to know everything. Everything Rebecca told you about what he did. Every detail, no matter how ugly. There was a pause. Are you sure? Once I tell you, you can't unhear it. I'm sure. So Claire told him the full story that Rebecca's letter had only outlined. The pattern of escalation, the systematic destruction of boundaries, the way Gregory had weaponized his position. She described how Rebecca had tried every official channel, how she'd been systematically dismissed and gaslit, how she'd finally broken down in that parking garage, when Gregory had laid out his ultimatum with the casual cruelty of someone who knew he held all the power. "We have documentation," Claire said. "Everything Rebecca saved. Emails, the fake evidence with metadata showing when it was created, her journal entries from that time. Enough to prove what he did. If anyone will listen, they'll listen." Daniel's voice was hard with determination. "I'll make them listen. First thing Monday, I'm calling his company's HR department. And if they try to bury this, we go to the press. We make this so public he can't hide behind his reputation anymore. Rebecca made me promise to protect you and Lily from this," Claire said softly. "Are you sure you want to open this door? Rebecca's dead. She can't be hurt anymore. But there are other women at his company right now who don't know they're in danger. We can stop him, Claire. We can make sure her suffering meant something." They talked for over an hour, Claire's relief at finally being able to act mixing with anxiety about what lay ahead. They made plans, discussed strategy, agreed to meet the next day to go through all the documentation. When Daniel finally hung up, it was nearly midnight, but he felt more awake than he had in years. He spent another hour researching Cascade Marketing Solutions' structure, identifying the HR director and legal counsel, crafting the email he'd send first thing Monday. Then he wrote down everything he knew, creating a timeline, organizing facts that would be harder to dismiss than emotions. Before bed, he checked on Lily one more time. She was sleeping fitfully, her stuffed elephant clutched tight. He tucked the blanket around her and whispered a promise into the dark room. "I'm going to make this right, sweetheart. For you and for your mom." Monday morning, Daniel sent the email at 8:45 a.m. sharp. By 10:30, his phone was ringing. "Mr. Barrett? This is Jennifer Chen from Cascade Marketing Solutions. I'm the Director of Human Resources." Her voice was carefully professional. "I'd like to meet with you this afternoon if possible. Would 2 p.m. work?" It was happening faster than he'd expected. "I'll be there." The Cascade Marketing Solutions building was all glass and steel, the kind of place that proclaimed success and innovation. Daniel felt underdressed in his khakis and button-down as he rode the elevator to the 12th floor. But he reminded himself he wasn't here to impress anyone. He was here for justice. Jennifer Chen was in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense. She led him to a conference room where a man in an expensive suit waited the company's legal counsel. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Barrett." Jennifer began once they were seated. "The allegations you've made are quite serious. Before we proceed, I need to ask, are you represented by legal counsel?" "Not yet. Should I be?" "That's your choice. But I want to be clear that this conversation is being documented, and anything you say could potentially be used in legal proceedings." She slid a form across the table. "This acknowledges that you understand your rights and are choosing to speak with us voluntarily." Daniel signed it, then pulled out the folder Claire had given him. "Everything you need is in here. Emails showing Gregory Holden's inappropriate behavior toward my ex-wife. Text messages that crossed professional boundaries. The fake evidence he created to make it look like they were having an affair note. The metadata showing when those files were actually created, months after the affair supposedly started. Rebecca's journal entries documenting what was happening and her attempts to report it through official channels. Jennifer and the lawyer reviewed the documents in silence. Daniel watched their expressions shift from skepticism to concern to what might have been anger, though they were too professional to show much. "These are copies?" Jennifer asked. "Yes, I have the originals in a safe place." Along with Rebecca's dying declaration about what happened and why she left her job and her family, Daniel leaned forward. "Gregory Holden used his position to harass my wife. And when she wouldn't stay silent, he manufactured evidence to frame her for an affair that never happened. He threatened to destroy her reputation if she didn't disappear. So she did. And 3 years later, she died of cancer without ever seeing her daughter again because she was too afraid to come back. Mr. Barrett, I'm very sorry for what your ex-wife went through. Jennifer's voice was sincere. These allegations are disturbing, and we take them very seriously. I need to ask, are you aware of any other employees who may have had similar experiences with Mr. Holden? No, but I'd be shocked if Rebecca was his only victim. Men like him don't usually stop at one. The lawyer made a note. We're going to launch a thorough investigation. Mr. Holden will be placed on paid administrative leave while we look into this. If we find evidence supporting these allegations, appropriate action will be taken. What kind of appropriate action? That will depend on our findings and legal counsel's advice. The lawyer's tone was maddeningly vague. But I can assure you, this will be taken seriously. Daniel stood. I hope so. Because if it's not, if this gets buried or minimized or swept under the rug, I'll take all of this to the press. The public has a right to know what kind of man is in a senior leadership position at your company. He left before they could respond, his heart pounding with adrenaline and anger. It was a start. But he had no idea if it would be enough. Claire called him as he was driving home. How did it go? They're investigating. Holden's on leave. They said all the right things. But I don't know if they'll actually do anything meaningful. Daniel pulled into a parking lot, needing to focus on the conversation. We need a backup plan. Do you have any media contacts? Actually, yes. A journalist who covers workplace issues for the Oregonian. Want me to reach out? Not yet. Let's give Cascade a week to do the right thing. But if they don't... Daniel trailed off. The implication clear. That week was one of the longest of Daniel's life. He went through the motions work, parenting, the routines that kept life functioning while waiting for news. Lily asked questions about her mother that he tried to answer honestly without overwhelming her. Claire came by several times, helping him sort through old photos of Rebecca that he'd packed away, creating a memory box for Lily. On Friday, Jennifer Chen called. Mr. Barrett, I wanted to update you on our investigation. 2 other women have come forward with complaints about Mr. Holden since we put him on leave. Their descriptions of his behavior are consistent with what you described regarding your ex-wife. Daniel's hand tightened on the phone. So, there were others. Yes, and based on the evidence you provided along with their testimonies, we've terminated Mr. Holden's employment effective immediately. He'll receive no severance and no positive references. We're also conducting a comprehensive review of our harassment reporting procedures to ensure nothing like this happens again. That's it? He just loses his job? Daniel's voice rose. He destroyed my wife's life. She died thinking she was a coward when she was actually a victim. He drove her away from her family, and now my daughter will never know her mother. And he just loses his job? I understand your frustration. Jennifer's voice was genuinely sympathetic. But this is the extent of what we can do as an employer. However, I want you to know that the women who came forward are considering legal action, civil suits for harassment and hostile work environment. If you'd like to connect with their attorney, I can facilitate that. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, but it was something. Yes, Daniel said. Please put me in touch with their lawyer. After hanging up, he sat in his car for a long time, processing. Gregory Holden was fired. His reputation was damaged. His career was likely over, at least in this city. Other victims had found the courage to speak up. The investigation was making waves through the company, forcing systemic changes. Rebecca's suffering hadn't been meaningless after all. 3 weeks later, Daniel and Lily and Claire drove to the lake where Daniel and Rebecca had gotten married 7 years earlier. The plan had emerged gradually. Claire had Rebecca's ashes, and Lily had asked if they could scatter them somewhere. Her mother had been happy. It was a Saturday morning, cold but clear. The kind of autumn day that made you grateful for sunshine, even as it reminded you winter was coming. They walked down to the dock, Lily between them holding both their hands, the wooden box with Rebecca's ashes in Claire's backpack. Tell me about the wedding, Lily said as they walked. So Daniel told her. About Rebecca's dress, about the ceremony at sunset. about how his hands had shaken so badly he'd almost dropped the ring. Claire added memories too, how Rebecca had tried on 17 dresses before finding the right one, how she'd cried while doing her own makeup because she was so happy, how she'd written her own vows and practiced them for weeks. They reached the dock and stood looking out over water that reflected the cloudless sky. Claire opened the box and poured some of the ashes into a small biodegradable container shaped like a flower. "You should be the one," Claire said to Lily. "She's your mom." Lily held the container carefully, looking down at the gray-white ashes. "Mom, I wish I'd known you better, but I'm learning about you from Dad and Aunt Claire. And I think I would have really liked you." Her voice was steady, mature, beyond her years. "I hope you're not sad anymore, wherever you are. I hope you know we love you and we're not mad at you for leaving because we understand now why you had to." She released the ashes to the wind and water, watching them scatter across the surface of the lake. Daniel and Claire took turns adding their own silent goodbyes, releasing what remained of Rebecca to become part of the earth and water and air. When the container was empty, they stood together in silence. A fish jumped near the shore. Birds called from the trees. The world continued, indifferent to human grief, but somehow still beautiful. "Can we come back every year?" Lily asked. "On her birthday?" "Yeah, sweetheart. That's a perfect tradition." They spent the afternoon by the lake, sharing stories and memories, slowly transforming grief into something more bearable. Claire told stories about Rebecca as a child, scraped knees and tree forts, late-night conversations about dreams and fears. Daniel shared memories of their courtship, of early marriage, of the good times before everything fell apart. Lily absorbed it all, asking questions, demanding details, building a picture of her mother from fragments. She seemed lighter somehow, less burdened by the mystery of abandonment, now that she understood it hadn't been abandonment at all, but sacrifice, however misguided. On the drive home, Lily fell asleep in the back seat. Claire and Daniel talked quietly in the front. "Thank you," Claire said, "for letting me be part of this. For not shutting me out. Thank you for having the courage to tell us the truth. I know it wasn't easy." Daniel glanced at her. "What happens now? With us, I mean. Do we stay in touch? Or, I'd like to stay in touch." "For Lily, definitely. But maybe for us, too. You're the only other person who really understands what it was like losing Rebecca." Claire paused. "If that's okay with you." "Yeah, that's more than okay." They fell into a rhythm over the following weeks. Claire came by most Saturdays, sometimes bringing supplies for art projects, sometimes just to hang out. She and Lily bonded over a shared love of fantasy books and terrible puns. She helped with homework and attended school events, and slowly became a fixture in their lives. Daniel found himself grateful for her presence. Not as a replacement for Rebecca that wasn't possible or desired, but as a connection to the past and a support in the present. Someone who understood without needing explanation. Someone who could see Rebecca in Lily's expressions and share that recognition without it hurting quite so much. 2 months after the lake trip, Claire brought up an idea she'd been considering. "I've been thinking about starting a foundation. In Rebecca's name, something that provides legal support to women dealing with workplace harassment. Help them navigate HR, find lawyers, know their rights." "That's a beautiful idea," Daniel said. They were in his kitchen, Lily at a friend's house for a sleepover. "How can I help?" "Help me build it. Be on the board. Make sure we honor her memory in a way that actually helps people. Not just feels good." They shook hands across the table, sealing the commitment. Over the next few months, they worked together building the Rebecca Barrett Foundation. Claire cashed in investments, and Daniel contributed his savings. Donations poured in from people who'd read about the case in the news coverage that had emerged after Gregory Holden's firing. The foundation officially launched in the spring, 6 months after Claire had knocked on Daniel's door in the rain. They held a small ceremony at a local community center, attended by the other women who'd filed complaints against Gregory Holden, by colleagues from Daniel's and Claire's lives, by friends who wanted to support. Lily, now 8 years old, and growing into herself, gave a short speech that she'd written with minimal help. My mom made a mistake by staying quiet when someone hurt her, but we're going to help other people not make that same mistake. We're going to make sure they know it's okay to speak up, and that there are people who will believe them and help them. That's what the foundation is for. That's my mom's real legacy. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. 1 year after Claire's visit, Daniel stood in his kitchen making pancakes again, still not great at it, but marginally better than before. Lily sat at the table doing homework, Claire beside her helping with a particularly tricky math problem. It was a Saturday morning, and this had become their routine. Claire usually came over Friday night and stayed through Sunday, sleeping on the pull-out couch, becoming part of their weekly rhythm. She'd officially moved back to Portland 6 months ago, after spending years in Seattle, wanting to be closer to Lily, to the foundation, to this new family they were building from the ruins of the old one. "Dad, these are definitely lumpy," Lily announced without looking up from her math. "But are they the good lumpy or the bad lumpy?" Daniel asked. Playing their familiar game, the acceptable lumpy, Lily decided diplomatically, making Claire laugh. Daniel brought plates to the table and sat down. This was his life now. Not the life he'd planned, not the life he'd expected, but somehow a good life anyway. He had his daughter, healthy and happy, and growing into someone he was proud of. He had Claire, who'd become family in ways that went beyond blood partner in the foundation, co-parent in all but name. Friend when he needed one. He had purpose in the foundation work. Satisfaction in knowing Rebecca's story was helping others. In the past year, they'd helped 15 women navigate workplace harassment complaints, provided legal assistance that resulted in 3 significant settlements, and were in talks with several major Portland employers about revising their harassment policies. It didn't bring Rebecca back. Nothing could. But it meant her suffering hadn't been wasted, that some good had grown from the grief. "What are you thinking about?" Claire asked, catching his expression. "Just that this is okay," Daniel said. "Not what I would have chosen a year ago, but okay anyway, maybe even good. Is it weird that I talked to Aunt Claire about mom stuff more than you?" Lily asked suddenly. That childhood bluntness cutting through to questions. Adults danced around. Daniel and Claire exchanged glances. They'd noticed this pattern. Lily went to Claire with questions about Rebecca, seemed more comfortable processing her mother's memory with her aunt than her father. It had stung at first, felt like a failure on Daniel's part. But Claire had helped him understand it differently. "Not weird at all," Daniel said. "Claire knew your mom her whole life. And sometimes it's easier to talk to someone who isn't quite as close to the hurt, you know? Plus," Claire added, "your dad knew your mom as his wife. I knew her as my sister. Those are different relationships, different stories. You get a more complete picture by hearing from both of us." Lily nodded, satisfied with this explanation, and returned to her math. Later, after Lily had gone to her friend's house for the afternoon, Daniel and Claire worked on foundation paperwork at the kitchen table. They'd fallen into an easy partnership, Claire handling outreach and communications, while Daniel managed the operational and financial aspects. "I got an email from a reporter at the New York Times," Claire said, not looking up from her laptop. "They're doing a feature on workplace harassment prevention. Want to include the foundation. National exposure. That would be huge for fundraising." "Yeah. But it means talking publicly about Rebecca again. About the divorce. About Gregory Holden. About all of it." Claire finally looked up. "How do you feel about that?" Daniel considered. A year ago, the thought of their story going national would have terrified him, but he'd learned that privacy was less important than impact, that personal discomfort was a price worth paying if it helped others. "I think we do it. Rebecca died thinking her story didn't matter. Let's prove her wrong as loudly as possible." Claire smiled, relieved. "I was hoping you'd say that." They worked in companionable silence for a while, the kind of comfortable quiet that only comes with time and trust. Eventually, Daniel spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" "Always. Do you ever resent me? For having the years with Rebecca that you didn't? For being able to move forward when you're stuck being her sister forever?" Claire set down her laptop, giving the question the consideration it deserved. Sometimes, she admitted. Sometimes I'm jealous that you got to be her everything. Even if only for a while. But mostly I'm grateful. Grateful you loved her enough to fight for her memory. Grateful you let me be part of Lily's life instead of shutting me out. Grateful we're doing this together, instead of each carrying it alone. I'm grateful too. For you showing up that morning even though it was terrifying. For trusting me with the truth. For becoming family. We're building something good from something broken. Claire said softly. I think Rebecca would approve. That evening, with Lily still at her sleepover and unexpected free time stretching before them, Daniel and Claire decided to drive back to the lake. They'd been there several times since scattering Rebecca's ashes, but always with Lily, always with purpose. Tonight was different, spontaneous. Just the two of them, sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. They walked down to the dock and stood where Daniel and Rebecca had exchanged vows, where they'd released her ashes to water and wind. The cherry tree they'd planted on Rebecca's birthday stood a few yards away, taller now, its branches bare but alive, waiting for spring. Do you think she'd forgive me? Claire asked quietly. For waiting so long to tell you? For keeping her secrets, when maybe I should have broken them sooner? She already has, Daniel said with certainty. She knew you were doing what you thought was right, honoring her wishes even when they were hard. That's what love looks like, sometimes carrying someone's burdens even when they're heavy. Do you forgive her? For leaving? For not trusting you with the truth? Daniel thought about that. Forgiveness wasn't a single moment, but a process. Something he worked at daily. I'm getting there. Some days are easier than others. But I understand better now why she made the choices she did. Fear makes us do things we wouldn't normally do, and she was drowning in fear. They stood watching the sun set. The same sun that had witnessed a wedding, and would witness countless other moments of joy and grief and ordinary human life. The lake reflected the changing sky, pink and orange, fading to purple and blue. Thank you for being here, Daniel said. For showing up and staying and helping me figure out how to turn grief into something useful. I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have. You're stronger than you think. Claire smiled. But I'm glad you didn't have to do it alone. They drove home in comfortable silence, the sky fully dark by the time they reached the city. Lily would be home tomorrow, full of stories about her sleepover and ready for their usual Sunday routine. The foundation had a board meeting on Tuesday. Life would continue its forward march, carrying them along whether they were ready or not. But tonight, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the absence of pain. He still missed Rebecca, still carried anger at what had been done to her, still grieved for the years they'd all lost. But peace in knowing he was doing something about it, that Rebecca's story was making a difference, that good could grow from even the worst circumstances. He parked in front of his house, still small, still filled with second-hand furniture and memories, but feeling more like home than it had a year ago. Claire walked in behind him, both of them exhausted but satisfied with the day. Coffee? Daniel offered, starting the pot out of habit. Always. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Claire had delivered her earth-shattering news a year ago, where Daniel had first read Rebecca's letter, where they'd planned the foundation and processed grief and built something new from something broken. Here's to moving forward, Claire said, raising her coffee mug. To moving forward while remembering back, Daniel amended, clinking his mug against hers. To Rebecca. To second chances. To family in unexpected forms. To all of that, they drank their coffee and talked about nothing important: upcoming foundation events, Lily's school performance, the approaching holidays. Normal conversation between people who'd learned to be family, who'd chosen each other in the aftermath of tragedy and decided to build rather than break. Outside, the world continued its rotation, indifferent to their small dramas and quiet victories. But inside this small house in Portland, three people who'd been broken had found ways to heal together, to honor the dead by living fully, to transform grief into purpose and purpose into hope. It wasn't the ending anyone would have chosen, but it was a good ending anyway, and perhaps more importantly, It was a beginning of healing, of justice, of a new kind of family built on honesty and choice, rather than just blood and obligation. Daniel finished his coffee and looked around his kitchen, at the crayon marks on the walls, at the photographs stuck to the refrigerator, at Claire across from him planning next week's foundation outreach, at the life he'd built from ruins. It was enough, more than enough. It was exactly what it needed to be, and somewhere, he hoped, Rebecca knew that too. Knew that her death hadn't been the end of her story but a transformation, that her suffering had catalyzed change, that her daughter was growing up, knowing she'd been loved fiercely, even by someone she barely remembered. The past couldn't be changed, but the future could be shaped. And that, Daniel had learned, was the only power any of them really had, the power to choose how to move forward, how to honor those we'd lost, how to build something beautiful from pieces of heartbreak. He chose to build, they all did. Together, and in that choice, there was grace.